He said it the way a man announces the weather, casual, certain, like it required no defense. Quan Tai Jin leaned back in the leather chair, swirled the whiskey in his glass, and looked across the private lounge at nothing in particular. I could never fall in love with a black woman. No venom, no cruelty. Just a statement of fact, or what he believed was a fact, delivered the way men like him delivered everything, with absolute, unquestioned authority. Across the table, Zuri Adebayo did not flinch. She did not look away, did not reach for her drink, did not allow a single muscle in her face to betray the precise moment his words drove themselves into her chest, like something sharp and cold. She simply smiled. And behind that smile, she began to calculate. Because Quan Tai Jin had just made the single most expensive assumption of his life, and he had no idea that the woman sitting 3 feet away from him had loved him quietly, steadily, and without apology for the last 10 years. He had no idea that she had just decided to make him pay for it. If you have ever loved someone who could not see you standing right in front of them, who could look directly at you and somehow see everything except what mattered, then you already know what this story costs. Stay with me, because this is where it begins, and we are just getting started. If this kind of story moves you, subscribe to the channel right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. These are the stories I live to tell. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me which city or country you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let us go back to that room, back to that whiskey glass, back to the moment Quan Tai Jin said the one thing he would spend the rest of his life trying to take back. The private lounge on the 42nd floor of the Quan Meridian Tower occupied a corner of the building that most employees did not know existed. There were no signs pointing to it. The elevator required a code that changed every 72 hours. The furniture was dark, the lighting was low, and the view of Seoul at night made the city look like something a god might have arranged for personal entertainment. Taejin had built this room for exactly 3 purposes: decisions that could not be made in boardrooms, conversations that could not be overheard, and the rare occasions when he needed to sit with the only 2 people in his life who were permitted to tell him the truth. Han Sung-rok occupied the chair to his left, as he always did. Sung-rok was 41, lean in the way that men who had survived difficult decades tended to be lean. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. He had served beside Taejin since they were young men navigating a criminal underworld that killed most of the people who entered it. He knew when to speak and when to keep his mouth shut, which made him rarer than gold in a world full of people who talked too much. Zuri sat across from them both, legs crossed, a glass of sparkling water near her hand. She had not touched the whiskey they offered. She never did during what she privately called their debrief evenings, the monthly ritual where Taejin processed whatever had gone wrong in his life over the past 30 days, and she and Seung-rok listened, pushed back when he was wrong, and helped him navigate. She had been doing this for 10 years, 10 years of sitting in rooms exactly like this one, 10 years of watching him be brilliant and stubborn and occasionally cruel to the wrong people and sometimes devastatingly kind when no one expected it. 10 years of knowing more about him than any person alive, including himself. The conversation that night had started with his latest relationship ending. A woman named Park Ji-soo. Beautiful, socially connected, appropriate in every way that Taejin measured appropriateness. She had lasted 11 months, which was a personal record. Then she made the mistake of issuing an ultimatum. Choose between her and the syndicate. And Quan Tai Jin did not respond to ultimatums. He responded to them the way walls respond to weather. He simply remained. She left. He sat in the private lounge and reported it with the same emotional register he might use to announce a canceled business meeting. She is gone, he said. It is better. Sung-rok made a sound that was not quite agreement. Zuri said nothing and watched him. This was the pattern. Every woman eventually became something he had to manage rather than someone he wanted to be near. And then the management became exhausting. And then the relationship ended. And then Taejin sat in this room and convinced himself it was better. That he was built for the kind of life that did not include the complications of loving someone. Then Seung-rok, because he was occasionally reckless in ways that Zuri had learned to appreciate, asked the question he had clearly been sitting on for some time. Have you ever actually considered what you want? In a woman. Seriously considered. Taejin rotated the glass in his hand. I have considered it. And? Korean. Conservative family values, but enough independence to not require constant attention. Educated, but not interested in competing. Comfortable with my world. Sungrok glanced at Zuri with an expression she recognized, the barely visible smirk of a man who was about to cause trouble. What about someone like Zuri? He said. The glass stopped rotating. Taejin looked at Seungrok first. Then he looked at Zuri with the calm, appraising expression he used in boardrooms when someone said something that required careful evaluation. Then he said it. I could never fall in love with a black woman. He said it simply, without hesitation, without appearing to register that the person he was describing was sitting directly across from him, watching his face. He continued speaking, elaborating, explaining his reasoning in the measured way he explained all things. Cultural differences, family expectations, the complexity of perception within the syndicate, the gap between their worlds that could be navigated as colleagues and friends, but that he believed would be incompatible as partners. Each sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a considerable height. Sungrok had gone very still. Zuri did not move. She listened to every word. She heard the reasoning. She understood the architecture of his belief. Not born from hatred, not from cruelty, but from assumption. From a framework he had constructed so early and maintained so thoroughly that it had become invisible to him. He did not even recognize it as a wall. He thought it was simply the shape of reality. That was the part she could not let stand. When he finished speaking, she lifted her glass of sparkling water and took a single, unhurried sip. Then she set the glass down and looked at him. "Do you actually believe that?" she said. "Or have you just never tested it?" Taejin frowned. "There is nothing to test. Then you would not be afraid to." "I am not afraid of anything." The room was very quiet. Sungrok leaned back in his chair with the carefully constructed expression of a man pretending to be interested in the ceiling. Zuri leaned forward, just slightly, and rested her forearms on the table. 3 dates, she said. Real ones. You treat them like actual dates, not like you are doing me a favor. You give the experience your full, honest attention. She paused. If you feel nothing, if everything you just said is true, then I never bring this up again. I accept your worldview, and I stop arguing with you about it entirely. Another pause. But if something changes, you have to acknowledge that the wall was never about culture. It was something you built inside yourself. Taejin studied her for a long moment, the way he studied everything, thoroughly, looking for the angle, looking for what was hidden. You believe you can change how I think in 3 dates. I believe the truth is already there, she said. I'm just giving you 3 chances to look at it. He should have felt the danger in that sentence. He had survived this long precisely because he was extraordinarily good at recognizing danger. He read rooms, read people, read the silence between words. But Zuri was the one person who had been close enough, long enough, to know exactly how to stay inside his blind spot. He extended his hand across the table. Fine, he said. 3 dates. She shook it. Her hand was warm and steady, and she held his gaze without a flicker of uncertainty, and Taejin experienced the brief, quickly suppressed sensation that he had just agreed to something he did not fully understand. He dismissed the sensation. He knew Zuri. He had known her for a decade. She was extraordinary in every professional capacity and one of the 3 people alive whose presence he actually valued. But love? He knew himself. He knew his own mind. 3 dates would prove exactly what he already believed. He was certain of it. That certainty, it would later become clear, was the most expensive thought he had ever allowed himself. Zuri Adebayo had arrived in Seoul 9 years earlier, though Taejin did not know the full version of that arrival, only the professional one. What he knew, she had been recommended by a financial consultant he trusted. She was a forensic accountant. She was 22 at the time, recently certified, frighteningly good at identifying patterns and numbers that other professionals missed. He had hired her on a project basis to examine irregularities in the Quan Meridian Logistics accounts. She found embezzlement that 3 of his previous accountants had missed or concealed. She found it in 4 days. She did not leverage the discovery for personal gain, did not try to negotiate a permanent salary increase on the spot, did not perform. She simply walked into his office, laid the documentation in front of him, and explained what she had found in precise, unhurried language. He offered her a permanent position that afternoon. She negotiated better terms than he initially proposed, which impressed him more than the accounting had. What Taijin did not know, what she had never told him and never intended to tell him, was the rest of the story. She had come to Seoul running from something, not from law enforcement, not from debt or danger in any material sense. She had come running from the particular grief of losing her mother at 21 and finding that grief too large to contain within familiar walls, within a family that processed loss by distributing it into noise and activity, and Zuri had needed silence. She had needed distance. She had needed to stand somewhere that felt entirely new. Seoul had been a destination chosen half by research and half by instinct. She had spoken Korean at a functional level since university. She had always been the kind of person who absorbed languages the way other people absorbed songs, effortlessly and permanently. She knew the city would be difficult, disorienting, demanding. She chose it for exactly those reasons. She needed something that required her full attention, so she could not spend all of it on the hollow space her mother had left. Then she met Kwon Tae-jin. He was 34 when they met. She was 22. The gap in age and power and experience was significant enough that anything romantic would have been both inappropriate and impractical, and Zuri recognized this with the clear-eyed practicality that governed most of her decisions. But she also recognized, within the first month of working for him, that she was in the presence of someone unlike anyone she had encountered. A man who commanded extraordinary loyalty from people who had every reason to fear him instead, who could hold an entire room in suspension with a single quiet sentence, who had built something immense from conditions that should have consumed him. She was not naive about what he was. She understood the syndicate. She saw the mechanisms of his power clearly enough. She was not drawn to the violence or the danger. She was drawn to him, specifically. The man who sat in private rooms like this one and occasionally admitted things to a handful of trusted people that he would never allow the outside world to see. The man who remembered small details about the people he cared about, their preferences, their habits, their fears, and acted on that memory without announcing that he had done so. The man who, 3 weeks into her employment, had noticed that she skipped lunch when she was overwhelmed and had arranged, without explanation, for a tray to appear at her desk at 1 o'clock every day for the next 2 years. She had never mentioned it. He had never brought it up. That was its own kind of language. Over the years, she had learned to file what she felt into a separate compartment and perform the friendship with full commitment, because the friendship was real. It was not a consolation prize. It was a genuine thing, built over 10 years of arguments and laughter and crisis and honesty, and she valued it fiercely. But the other thing, the thing she had never named aloud to him, had not diminished. It had simply learned to live in the same space as the friendship without disturbing it. Until tonight. Until he said what he said. And she felt for the first time in years something harden inside her. Not bitterness. Something closer to resolution. She had spent a decade making herself indispensable, making herself present, making herself real. And he had organized her, somewhere inside his own framework, into a category that did not include the possibility of what she was to him. He had done it without cruelty. But he had done it. The bet was not strategy, or not only strategy, it was the only door she could see. She was going to walk through it. After Sung Rok left and the lounge emptied, Zuri rode the elevator down alone. The city spread below the glass wall in long rivers of light, and she stood with her reflection hovering over Seoul and felt the weight of what she had just set in motion. She had given herself 3 chances. That was all. 3 dates to make Kwon Tae-jin look at her. Actually look, and see something his assumptions had been covering for 10 years. If she failed, she kept her word. She accepted the shape of what they were and stopped wanting it to be anything else. She had survived worse. She had survived losing the person she loved most in the world at 21 and had built a life in a city 4,000 miles from anything familiar. She could survive this too. But she was not going to fail. She knew him. She knew precisely where his walls were built because she had been standing next to them for a decade, and walls that have existed long enough without being tested begin to have very specific weak points. She pressed her palm against the cool glass of the elevator door. Below her, Seoul glittered and moved and hummed with the indifferent energy of a city that did not particularly care what any of its inhabitants decided or risked or lost. She found that comforting, oddly. 3 dates. 1 week. Kwon Tae-jin versus the truth of his own heart. Zuri Adebayo had survived harder odds. The elevator reached the lobby. She straightened her jacket, lifted her chin, and walked out into the night. Back on the 42nd floor, Kwan Tai-jin poured himself another 2 fingers of whiskey and sat for a longer time than he intended before standing up and leaving. He told himself it was because the view was worth sitting with. He did not examine any other reason. That was already the beginning of his problem. The morning after the bet, Kwan Tai-jin woke up at 5:15 the way he always did, not because an alarm told him to, but because his body had long since decided that sleep was a logistical necessity rather than something to be enjoyed. He lay in the dark for approximately 40 seconds, which was longer than usual. Then he got up. He ran 6 kilometers on the treadmill in his penthouse gym, showered, dressed, and sat down at his desk by 6:30 with a cup of black coffee and the overnight reports from 3 different divisions of Kwan Meridian Holdings. His mornings were engineered for efficiency. Every variable was controlled, every minute accounted for. By 7:15, he had reviewed the reports, flagged 2 items for follow-up, and sent 8 messages. By 7:16, he realized he was thinking about the bet. He set down the coffee cup. This was irritating, not the bet itself. The bet was a minor event, a casual arrangement with a woman he had known for a decade. 3 dinners. A handshake. Nothing in his life had genuinely surprised him in years, and certainly nothing as manageable as this. What irritated him was that he was thinking about it at all. He picked the coffee back up and read the next report. By 7:19, he was thinking about it again. He called Sung-rok at 8 o'clock. Sung-rok answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake for a while. He was one of those people whose sleep requirements had also been permanently altered by years of operating in environments where sleeping too long could kill you. "You are calling early," Sung-rok said. "I have a question." "About the syndicate?" "No." A pause. "About Zuri?" "About the bet," Tai-jin said, which was technically more precise but amounted to the same thing. "I want to know what you were thinking when you suggested it." "I was thinking it would be interesting." "Interesting." Tai-jin's voice was flat. "You created a situation that puts our most valuable professional relationship at risk because you wanted it to be interesting." "Our most valuable professional relationship," Sung-rok repeated, and there was something in the way he said it. Not mockery exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. "Is that how you think about her?" "She manages the financial infrastructure of an organization worth $11 billion. She also sat outside the hospital for 9 hours after the Daejeon incident and did not go home until the doctor confirmed you were stable." Sung-rok let that land for a moment. "I remember that more than the 11 billion, personally." Tai-jin did not respond immediately. The Daejeon incident had been 4 years ago, a meeting that became an ambush. 2 of his lieutenants had not survived it. He had survived it with a knife wound that had required emergency surgery and 22 stitches, and the memory of those hours was not something he spent time revisiting. He had not known Zuri was at the hospital. Nobody had told him. "That is not relevant," he said. "To what?" "To anything." "Right," Sung-rok said. "What was your actual question?" "I want the first date to be appropriate. A dinner, private floor, good service, none of the usual security theater." Sung-rok was quiet for a moment. "You are already planning it." "I made an agreement. I honor my agreements." "Of course you do." Another pause. "She likes that Japanese place in Gangnam, the one with the chef who does the tableside preparation. She mentioned it twice last year." "I know which restaurant she likes," Tai-jin said, and hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he made a second call, to his reservations manager. He told himself, preparing for the first date, that he was approaching it the way he approached everything, with rigor, with preparation, with the intention of doing the thing correctly and concluding it efficiently. He did not approach it the way a man approaches a date. He approached it the way a man approaches a negotiation where he has already decided the outcome. This, it turned out, was a significant mistake. He arrived at the restaurant 12 minutes early because he arrived everywhere early. Control was about removing variables, and variables included uncertainty about whether you had enough time. He reviewed the private floor, approved the table arrangement, exchanged 3 words with the sommelier, and positioned himself near the window with a view of the entrance below. He watched Zuri get out of the car. She was wearing a midnight blue dress, not formal enough to feel performative, not casual enough to feel careless. Gold earrings that caught the light from the street before she even entered the building. She walked the way she always walked, like she had decided where she was going before she started moving, and the rest of the world was welcome to adjust. Taijin had seen Zuri hundreds of times, in offices and boardrooms, in this private lounge, and across crisis management tables at 2 in the morning when everything was going wrong. He had a complete and detailed mental image of her. He looked at her walking toward the restaurant entrance and felt, with some confusion, that he was seeing something he had not seen before. He turned away from the window before she got to the door. When she entered the private floor a few minutes later, he was standing near the table with his hands in his pockets and his expression composed, and he said, "You look well," which was the kind of sentence men say when they cannot say the accurate sentence without creating a situation they are not prepared to manage. Zuri looked at him. "Thank you. So do you." They sat down. The first 20 minutes of dinner felt like a regular evening, the rhythm they had built over a decade, comfortable and argumentative and easy, in the specific way of people who have spent enough time together to stop performing for each other. They argued about a decision he had made in the Hong Kong subsidiary. She thought the risk assessment was flawed. He thought the risk assessment was conservative to the point of cowardice. They both made points the other could not entirely dismiss, which was their standard outcome, and also one of the things he privately valued most about her. She was one of approximately 4 people alive who argued with him from a position of actual knowledge rather than fear. Then she set down her fork. She looked at him across the table with an expression he did not immediately recognize because he had not seen it directed at him before. "Stop looking at me like your friend," she said. "Tonight, look at me like a woman." The table went quiet. Not the room. The room was softly active around them, staff moving at the periphery, the city pressing against the glass. But the specific space between them went quiet the way rooms go quiet when someone says something that cannot be unsaid. Taejin held her gaze. His first instinct was to deflect. Say something dry, reframe the moment, move the conversation back to familiar territory. He had excellent reflexes for self-protection, and they were already activating. Then he made a conscious decision not to use them. He looked at her. Actually looked. He noticed the architecture of her face in a way he had apparently been systematically preventing himself from noticing. The precision of her features, the particular warmth of her skin in the restaurant's amber light, the way she held his gaze without any of the micro-anxieties that most people betrayed when they looked directly at him. Most people could not hold his attention comfortably. It pressed on them. She had always been immune to that pressure, and he had categorized it as professional confidence. And now he was looking at it differently, and it was something else entirely. It was not confidence, it was certainty. She looked at him like she had already decided something and was simply waiting for him to catch up. He reached for his wine glass and took a measured sip, buying himself the seconds he needed to reassemble his expression into something neutral. "You're going to make this complicated," he said. "I'm going to make this honest," she said. "There is a difference." They ate the rest of dinner with the conversation navigating different territory. Not lighter, but different. She told him something about her mother she had not told him before. A specific memory. Her mother making pepper soup when Zuri was sick, standing in the kitchen of their apartment in Lagos before the family came to the States, singing something low and off-key, because the singing was not about music, it was about presence, about making a small sound in a quiet apartment so a sick child would know someone was there. Taejin listened. He did not try to manage the conversation or redirect it toward more practical ground. He just listened. And something in him registered that this woman, who could dismantle the financial architecture of a criminal empire by Tuesday afternoon, had been carrying this particular memory for 20 years and had apparently never told anyone about the singing. She had told him. Dinner ended. They were descending toward the lobby, the night technically concluding on schedule, when the city made a decision of its own. The storm came in from the west, which the weather systems had not adequately predicted. By the time Taejin's armored sedan pulled into traffic, rain was hitting the windows hard enough that the city outside looked like a watercolor dissolving in real time. His driver reported, with the particular precision of a man who understood that bad news required exact language, that the Han River bridges were backed up 30 to 40 minutes, and that flooding on 2 key routes was worsening. Taejin looked out the window. Then he looked at Zuri, who was sitting beside him in the back seat watching the rain with an expression he could not fully read. "There is a boutique hotel 2 blocks from here," he said. "I know it," she said. "One night, The storm should clear by morning. She turned from the window and looked at him. Are you asking or informing? He almost smiled. Asking. Then yes, she said. The hotel was small, 12 rooms on 5 floors, the kind of establishment that did not advertise because its clientele did not require advertising. The manager recognized Tai-Jin and did not make a visible event of it, which was exactly the right response. There was one available suite. He took it. What happened inside that suite was not what either of them expected. No guards in the corridor, no lieutenants waiting outside the door with earpieces and weapons, no machinery of the empire surrounding him, pressing its weight into every room he occupied. He was, in the suite of a small hotel in the middle of a Seoul rainstorm, simply a man. He had forgotten what that felt like. He sat on the edge of the couch with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled and his face doing something it almost never did in the presence of other people. Relaxing, not performed relaxation, actual relaxation, the kind that happens without permission. Zuri, meanwhile, had gone to the kitchen. The suite had a small one. She stood in it looking through the pantry and refrigerator with the focused expression she brought to problems she intended to solve, and after several minutes of what appeared to be internal negotiation, she began pulling things out and arranging them on the counter. Tai-Jin watched from the doorway. What are you doing? Cooking. The hotel has room service. I know. She did not look up. I am cooking. He watched her work. She moved through the small kitchen with efficiency that was not particularly graceful. She knocked a measuring cup against the faucet and caught it before it fell. She reached for something on a high shelf and had to go up on her toes in a way that was entirely unselfconscious. She tasted something and made a face that indicated the stock was not what she would have preferred but would do. None of it was elegant. All of it was real. 40 minutes later, she set a bowl in front of him. Pepper soup. Made from what the hotel kitchen had, supplemented by spices she apparently carried in a small pouch in her bag, which he discovered when she produced it, and which prompted him to ask whether she traveled everywhere with her own spices. My mother did, she said simply. I started doing it without noticing. He tasted it. It was not perfect. The stock was too mild and the protein was not what she would have chosen. But there was something in the compound of flavors, the heat building slowly behind the initial taste, the aromatic weight of spices that were clearly from somewhere specific, from a kitchen and a history and a woman who sang off-key in a Lagos apartment that he had never tasted before. What makes it different from other food, he said. She picked up her spoon. Family. One word. She did not elaborate, and she did not need to, and the fact that she understood she did not need to was, in its own way, its own form of intelligence. He ate the whole bowl. Then she found the cockroach. It appeared on the baseboard near the bathroom door, a large one, the confident urban variety that moves like it has paid rent. Zuri saw it first, made a sound that was entirely inconsistent with her usual composure, and was somehow simultaneously across the room and closer to Tai-Jin in the same movement, one hand gripping his forearm with a force that would have been impressive under different circumstances. Tai-Jin looked at the cockroach, then he looked at her. She was pressed against his side, both hands now on his arm, staring at the baseboard with an expression of genuine, unperformative horror. Zuri, he said. I know, she said. I know it is ridiculous. Deal with it. He dealt with it. He did not make a performance of it, did not tease her about it, did not say any of the several things that immediately occurred to him. He handled the situation with the same efficient quiet he brought to more serious problems, and when it was resolved, he washed his hands and came back and sat beside her. She was still slightly pale. I have always hated them, she said, without looking at him. Since I was a child. I know they cannot actually do anything. Fear does not require logic, he said. She looked at him then. Something crossed her face. Surprise, almost. Like she had expected him to say something else. No, she said. It does not. They sat close. Neither of them moved to create more distance. The rain was hitting the windows in rhythmic waves, loud enough to fill the room, and at some point the thunder arrived, rolling concussions that shook the glass and made the lights flicker once, twice. Zuri's hand found his arm again. She did not make a sound. She simply reached, the way people reach for something solid when the ground becomes uncertain, and her hand closed around his forearm, and Taijin looked down at it and felt something in his chest shift slightly. "You are afraid of storms," he said. "Since I was 8, she said. "There was one in Lagos that took the roof off the neighbor's house. I was at the window watching." A pause. "My mother pulled me away and sat with me until it was over. She told me stories." The thunder rolled again. Taijin looked at her. Then, without particular deliberation, without making it into a moment, he began talking. He told her about a market in Busan where his mother used to take him as a child, about the specific smell of a street food stall that he had never found again, in any city, at any price point, about a dog he had adopted at 12 that had lived for 9 years, and that he had genuinely mourned in a way he had not mourned certain people, about the one time he had been genuinely terrified as an adult, not the Daejeon incident, which had been more adrenaline than fear, but a moment much quieter than that, early in his rise, when he had looked at what he was building and understood for the first time that there was no way back. He told her things he had not told Seong-rok. He told her things he had not told anyone. She listened. The storm moved through Seoul in waves, and she listened and her hand stayed on his arm, and at some point her head came to rest against his shoulder with the unplanned naturalness of someone whose body had simply decided where it was going without consulting the rest of her. He felt the weight of her against his side. He felt her breathing slow. She was asleep. He looked at her. Really looked, for the second time in one night, and the second time in a decade, and felt something he did not have an organized category for. It was not the clean, manageable feeling of respect or the comfortable feeling of familiarity. It was something that occupied a different chamber entirely, something that had apparently been living there for some time without his authorization. He liked being the man she ran to. He stayed awake for a long time, looking at the rain-blurred city through the window, with Zuri Adebayo asleep against his shoulder, and the thought that kept returning. The one he could not redirect or outmaneuver or simply decide to stop thinking was that he could not remember the last time he had talked to another person like that. He could not remember the last time a room had felt that quiet, and that full at the same time. He did not call it anything. He let it sit without a name. But it was there. The second date was her choice of location, which he had agreed to as part of the terms. He expected another restaurant. A gallery, perhaps. Something cultivated, something that would allow her to demonstrate the version of herself that Seoul had educated and polished over 9 years. She took him to an amusement park. 40 minutes outside the city, reached by ordinary car with no security advance team. She had been explicit about this. No entourage, no VIP access, no one clearing paths for him. He had argued. She had looked at him with the expression she used when his arguments were technically valid but substantively wrong, and eventually he had told his security detail to follow at a distance and stay invisible. He had not been in an amusement park since childhood. He had forgotten what they smelled like. Fried food and machine oil and sugar and the particular ozone edge of old electrical equipment running at capacity. He had forgotten the specific quality of noise, hundreds of people in various states of excitement, children operating at maximum volume, the mechanical screaming of roller coasters doing their job. He hated it for approximately 11 minutes. Then Zuri bought them ice cream from a cart near the park entrance. She paid before he could, which he found irritating and somehow also amusing, and handed him a cone with the matter-of-fact energy of someone who had decided that a billionaire crime boss could manage soft serve, and he ate it, and it tasted like summer, and he could not explain why that was a feeling worth noticing. They rode a roller coaster that he had not chosen and would not have chosen. She screamed through the entire descent, both hands up, and he gripped the lap bar with controlled tension and told himself he was monitoring the structural integrity of the ride, which was not entirely true. He was also watching her. The way her face looked when she was not monitoring it, pure and open and loud in a way she almost never was. When it stopped, she turned to him with wind-scattered hair and eyes bright and slightly wet from the rush of air and said, "Well?" "Structurally unsound," he said. She laughed so hard she had to hold the safety bar for support. They played a carnival game that involved throwing rings at bottles, and Taijin had the hand-eye coordination of someone who had trained for environments considerably more demanding than carnival games. But he lost the first round anyway because the ring dimensions were rigged, which he explained to Zuri with technical precision while she won a small stuffed bear and held it up with transparent satisfaction. "You cheated," he said. "I adjusted my approach to the actual conditions," she said. "That is called competence." The paddle boat on the artificial lake nearly ended in disaster. Neither of them was coordinated in the specific way paddle boats required, and they spent 20 minutes arguing about steering while moving in a progressively wider spiral that eventually brought them close enough to the concrete edge to cause the attendant visible distress. They fixed it eventually, sort of. At sunset, they sat on a bench near the lake with the last of the daylight going orange and soft behind the tree line, and Zuri watched the water and said, "I always imagined coming here with a boyfriend. When I was younger. Some imaginary person who would be patient enough to be bad at the paddle boat with me." Taejin looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was still watching the water, and her voice had the particular evenness of someone saying something real while pretending it is casual. "And?" he said. "And I kept coming alone." She paused. "Eventually you stop imagining the other person." He did not say anything. The light kept changing, and the lake caught it, and somewhere in the park, a child was having a passionate disagreement with what sounded like a parent, and Taejin sat on that bench and felt something happening in the space between his sternum and his spine that he could not categorize and could not redirect. Then Zuri turned to him. "When we both eventually find someone," she said, with the steady voice of a woman who had rehearsed this, "we are still going to be friends, right? Whatever happens with this bet." Taejin looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. It was the correct answer, the rational answer, the answer consistent with every other answer he had given in this conversation, and this friendship, and this decade. He gave it while simultaneously experiencing something dark and specific and deeply irrational at the image of Zuri Adebayo finding someone, belonging to someone, going home to someone who was not in this conversation. It was jealousy. He identified it with the precision of someone who had spent years mapping his own emotional terrain for threat assessment, and what he found was jealousy, clean and clear and entirely outside the category of friendship. He did not show it. He controlled his face the way he always controlled it, and the conversation moved on, and they returned the paddle boat, and they drove back to Seoul in the dark, with the city lights building on the horizon. But the jealousy sat in his chest the whole way home. One date remained. For the first time since the bet was made, Kwon Tae-jin was thinking about it. Not as an obligation he was managing, but as something he was actually waiting for. That distinction, small as it seemed, was the beginning of everything he was not prepared for. He messaged her the next morning about the third date. She did not respond. He waited until afternoon. Nothing. He sent a follow-up. Not demanding. He did not do demanding in personal context, but clear in its intention. An inquiry. A reasonable request for scheduling information. Nothing. That night, nothing. The next morning, he sat at his desk with the overnight reports and read 4 pages before he noticed he had not absorbed any of it. He read them again. He sent Seung-rok a message asking if he had heard from Zuri. Seung-rok responded 40 minutes later, saying she had mentioned she was busy with a personal matter. Nothing specific, a personal matter. Taejin set down his phone. He went back to the reports. By the third day without a response, he was operating with the specific quality of controlled irritation that his staff recognized and gave a wide berth. He sat through a syndicate meeting and caught himself, once, which was once more than ever before, losing the thread of a financial discussion he could normally track in his sleep. One of his captains had to repeat a number. Taejin looked at the man, and the man looked back with the expression of someone who had no interest in understanding what had just happened. That evening, he drove to her apartment. He told himself he was there to discuss the bet. The third date was owed. An agreement had been made. He was there to collect on the terms. He told himself this in the elevator. He was still telling himself this when the elevator doors opened and he stepped into the corridor and saw, walking toward the building exit, a man. Tall. Black. Mid-30s, Taejin estimated. The cut of his suit was expensive without trying to announce itself. He had the easy physical confidence of someone comfortable taking up space. The man walked past Taejin with a brief, neutral nod, the nod of 2 strangers in a corridor, and continued toward the exit. Taejin turned to watch him go. Then the apartment door at the end of the corridor opened. Zuri stepped out. She was not dressed for work. She was in comfortable clothes, her hair different from how she usually wore it at the office, and she looked relaxed in a way that had nothing to do with him. She saw him. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, not surprise exactly. Something more complex than both of those. "Taejin," she said. "Who is that?" he said. The words came out before he decided to say them. He heard them in the air between them and recognized, with some irritation, that they sounded exactly like what they were. Zuri tilted her head slightly. A friend. A friend. He looked at the elevator the man had just entered. He was here long. Were you timing him? He did not answer. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not fully decode, and then she said, "His name is Darius Cole. He is someone I have known for a while. We have been spending some time together." The corridor was very quiet. Taejin stood in it with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face doing what it had been trained to do, delivering nothing, betraying nothing. While inside his chest, something was happening that he did not have a controlled response to. "The bet," he said. "Is finished," she said quietly. 2 dates, Taejin. 2 dates and nothing changed. You were right. I was trying to prove something that was not there to prove. She looked at him directly. I think you should give Darius a chance to be in the picture, which means you and I should probably spend less time together for a while. He heard every word. He stood in the corridor and heard every word, and his face gave nothing, and his voice, when it came, was level and reasonable. I understand, he said. Good, she said. She went back inside. The door closed. Kwon Tae-jin stood in the corridor of her apartment building for a moment that lasted considerably longer than any moment had a right to last. Then he walked to the elevator. He wrote it down. He walked out of the building into the night air, and it was raining. Not the dramatic storm of their first date, but a steady, indifferent rain that asked nothing and offered nothing. And he stood on the sidewalk outside her building and could not make himself get into the car. His driver waited. The rain fell. And Tae-jin stood in it and felt, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, that he was not in control of something that mattered, and that the thing he was not in control of was not a negotiation or a crisis or an enemy's next move. It was the possibility that Zuri Adebayo was walking out of his life, not all at once, gradually. The way the most permanent losses always happen, not like something taken, but like something that simply, quietly, is no longer there when you finally think to look. He got into the car. He said nothing to his driver. They drove through the rain back toward a penthouse that had, without his permission, begun to feel like a place he was returning to alone. The rain followed him home, not literally. By the time the sedan reached the Kwon Meridian Tower, the weather had thinned to a fine mist that barely registered on the windows. But it was there anyway, in the way certain kinds of weather are present inside a person, regardless of what the sky is doing. Tae-jin rode the private elevator to his penthouse and walked through the rooms without turning on more than the minimum lights, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Seoul, with his jacket still on and his hands loose at his sides and his face doing absolutely nothing. The city moved below him the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by whatever any individual standing above it was working through. He had stood at this window during crisis negotiations, during the hours after violence, during the long nights following decisions that could not be unmade. The view had always been useful. Distance was useful. The capacity to look at something vast and remind himself that his problems, however significant, occupied a specific and finite portion of the available reality. Tonight the view was not helping. He stood there for a long time and could not name precisely what he was feeling, which was itself the problem, because Kwon Tae-jin could name most things. He had built his survival on the ability to identify variables accurately and respond to them without the distortion of emotion. He had been doing this for 20 years. It was not something he struggled with. What he was struggling with was the image of Darius Cole walking down that corridor, the easy posture, the expensive suit worn like it had not cost anything, the brief neutral nod of a man who had been somewhere comfortable and was leaving unhurried. Tae-jin's jaw moved once. He caught it and stopped it. He turned from the window. He sat at his desk, opened the overnight briefings, and read them for 45 minutes without retaining a single paragraph. Then he closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. He did not sleep for a considerable amount of time. In the morning, he was operational by 6:15 and professional by 6:30, and perfectly functional for all the purposes that the people around him required, which was the particular skill of men who have learned that the world does not pause for what they feel. He moved through the morning efficiently. 3 meetings before noon, each one concluded on time. He made 2 decisions that his senior staff later described to each other as unusually sharp, with the quality of someone cutting away everything unnecessary and going directly to the center of a problem. What they did not see was that he was cutting through everything because he could not afford to pause. Pausing meant the image came back. Sung-rok arrived at 11 for the weekly strategic overview and watched Tae-jin move through the agenda with the focused velocity of a man who needed to exhaust himself on work, the way other men exhaust themselves on exercise. When the agenda was finished, Sung-rok did not leave. He sat in the chair across from the desk and said nothing. Tae-jin signed a document. Was there something else? You went to her building last night. Tae-jin set down the pen. My security team reports to you now. Your security team is concerned. There is a difference. Sung-rok leaned back, unhurried, using the particular ease of a man who knew that the person across from him was not going to throw him out. What happened? Nothing happened. I went to confirm the third date. She informed me she was withdrawing from the arrangement. I accepted. I left. Tae-jin picked up the pen again. It is resolved. You stood outside her building in the rain for 11 minutes. There was something I was thinking through. For 11 minutes, in the rain, without getting in the car. Tae-jin looked up. Sung-rok held the look without flinching. He had been doing this for 2 decades. He was one of 3 people on Earth who could. There was a man, Tae-jin said. Sung-rok said nothing. Coming out of her building. Tae-jin's voice was even, measured, stripped of everything that might have indicated what the sentence cost him. She introduced him afterward, Darius Cole. She said they have been spending time together. Sung-rok was quiet for a moment. Then he said, How did that land? Like information, Tae-jin said, which is what it is. Is it? She is a free person. Her personal decisions are hers. I know that, Sung-rok said. I'm asking how it landed. Tae-jin put down the pen again with slightly more force than necessary. It was a small thing. In 15 years of working beside him, Sung-rok had learned that the small things were the accurate ones, the tells that only appeared when the controlled surface developed a hairline fracture. It landed badly, Tae-jin said. It cost him something to say it. Sung-rok could see that, the minor muscular tightening around the jaw, the deliberate quality of the breath before the sentence, the way he was looking at the desk instead of across the room when he said it. Badly, Sung-rok repeated. I did not enjoy the image of that man leaving her apartment. Tae-jin looked up. His eyes were level and clear, and telling the truth in a way his voice was still trying to moderate. I did not enjoy the idea that she will spend less time in my presence because another man is occupying it. I am aware of what that means, and I am working through it. Is there anything else? Sung-rok looked at him for a long moment. She has been in love with you for years, he said. The room went very still. Tae-jin did not move. I have suspected it for some time, Sung-rok said. She has never said it. She would not. That is not how she operates. But I have watched her in enough rooms with you to know what I am looking at. He paused. And now she has stopped watching and started moving in a different direction. Tae-jin was quiet. That is what the bet was, Sung-rok said. Not a challenge. Not a point of pride. She has been beside you for 10 years, and she needed to know if there was any path through the wall. He kept his voice flat, not accusatory, just accurate. And when 2 dates did not produce visible movement from you, she made a decision. She stopped waiting. The clock on the desk marked 3 seconds, 5 seconds. You are telling me this now, Tae-jin said very quietly. I am telling you now because last night you stood in the rain for 11 minutes, and this morning you have been burning through your own strategic agenda like a man trying to outrun something. Sung-rok stood up, straightening his jacket with the unhurried precision of a man who has said what he came to say. I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you what is true. What you decide to do with it is your business. He walked to the door. Sung-rok. He stopped. Did she tell you to say this? A pause. No, Sung-rok said. She told me nothing. She is not the kind of person who campaigns. He left. Tae-jin sat at his desk in the quiet office and looked at the document he had been about to sign and did not see a single word on it. He did not contact Zuri that day. He spent the afternoon in back-to-back operational meetings, and the evening reviewing an acquisition proposal that required his sign-off by morning, and he moved through both of those things with complete professional competence, because that was not something he was capable of losing. The work was not the problem. The problem arrived at 11:15 that night. He was in the penthouse study with the acquisition documents spread across the desk, and a second cup of coffee going cold at his elbow when his phone lit up with a message from his intelligence division. Routine surveillance notification. Nothing urgent. He glanced at it. Then he looked at it again. The notification was a flag on Darius Cole. Standard protocol. Any individual who made significant contact with someone in Taijin's immediate circle was automatically flagged for background assessment. Taijin had established this system years ago for security purposes. It was procedural. It was not personal. He opened the file. Darius Cole, 36. American national, born in Atlanta, currently based in Seoul. Senior consultant for a financial advisory firm operating across East Asia. Clean financial record. No criminal history in any jurisdiction. Socially connected within the Seoul international business community. The file included a photograph, the same man from the corridor, photographed at a business event 6 months prior, and 3 pages of professionally assembled background information, all of it legitimate, all of it indicating a man with no obvious complications, no hidden vulnerabilities, no angles, just a man. Taijin closed the file. He sat in the study with the acquisition documents and the cold coffee and the quiet that had settled over the penthouse, the way quiet settles over places that are large and empty, and he felt something he identified after a moment as the specific combination of recognition and resistance that arrived when a truth had been present for some time and could no longer be navigated around. He loved her. He sat with that sentence the way he sat with difficult operational facts, letting it exist without immediately converting it into action, without managing it or redirecting it or filing it somewhere more manageable. He loved Zuri Adebayo. He did not know precisely when it had happened. That was not how it worked, apparently. It was not an event. It was an accumulation. 10 years of moments that he had categorized incorrectly and now could not re-see in their wrong category, regardless of how hard he tried. Zuri outside a hospital for 9 hours. Zuri finding embezzlement in 4 days that 3 other people had missed or concealed. Zuri arguing with him when every other person in the room was doing careful calculations about the cost of disagreement. Zuri making pepper soup in a hotel kitchen with stock that was too mild, going up on her toes for the spices, catching the measuring cup before it fell. Zuri sleeping against his shoulder in a storm with her hand on his arm. Zuri laughing on a roller coaster with her hands up. Zuri on a bench at sunset saying she had stopped imagining the other person. He had been there for all of it. Present, attentive, gathering every detail with the precision that was simply how he experienced the world, and somehow organizing all of it under the wrong heading, filing it under known, trusted, valued, essential, not under the heading that was apparently the accurate one. He stood up from the desk. The acquisition documents could wait until morning. He went to the window, the same city, and stood there, and this time the view was doing something different. It was not giving him distance. It was giving him clarity, which was not always more comfortable. He needed to see her. He needed to tell her the truth before Darius Cole became something more permanent than a man leaving a corridor. He looked at his phone. It was 11:43 at night. He put the phone down. He would go in the morning, arrange to meet somewhere neutral. Tell her, with the directness he brought to every significant communication, what he had realized and what he intended to do about it. He was going to do this correctly. The notification came at 9:17 the following morning. He was in the car on the way to a meeting when Seung-rok's message arrived, and he opened it with the automatic efficiency of someone who processed messages while moving. And he read it once, and then he read it again, and then he sat very still in the back seat of the moving sedan with the message open on the screen and something happening in his chest that bore no resemblance to anything he had a practiced response for. The message contained a digital invitation, elegant design, clean typography, a rooftop venue he recognized, the exclusive hotel on Yowido, top floor, city views, the kind of space that was used for events that were meant to be memorable. The text read, Engagement Celebration, Zuri Adebayo and Darius Cole. This Saturday, 8 o'clock. He read it a third time. The car moved through Seoul traffic. Outside the window, the city was going about its morning, people and vehicles and the ordinary machinery of a day. And Tai Jin sat in the middle of it with the invitation on his phone and felt the specific quality of silence that settles over a man when he has understood something one day too late. His driver asked, without turning around, whether they were still going to the morning meeting. Tai Jin did not answer immediately. The engagement celebration was in 4 days. 4 days. He had spent last night deciding he would tell her the truth in the morning. He had spent 10 years not telling her anything. He had taken a week and 3 dates to begin understanding what had apparently been in the room for a decade. And he had moved at the careful, controlled pace of a man who was used to making decisions when he was certain, and certainty had cost him the window. "Change the destination," he said. His driver waited. "Take me to the syndicate hall." The emergency session of his senior captains was called for noon. Tai Jin sat at the head of the table in the lower conference room of the syndicate hall and looked at the faces arranged around it. 12 men, who between them commanded the most organized criminal infrastructure in Seoul, and opened the meeting on a financial matter involving the Busan port operations that genuinely required resolution. He ran the first 40 minutes with complete, focused precision. Then Captain Yu, who managed the Eastern District operations, and who was careful in direct proportion to the danger of any given topic, said, "Chairman, you reviewed the Busan figures twice and came to the same number both times, which is not your pattern." The table went quiet. Tai Jin looked at Yu. Yu had been with the organization for 14 years. He had survived longer than most people in his position survived because he was attentive in the specific way that careful men are attentive. He noticed what was happening in rooms before it became a problem, which was, in its own way, the same skill Tai Jin had. "The figures are confirmed," Tai Jin said. "Of course," Yu said. "I was observing, not questioning." Captain Park, who sat 2 seats down and who had worked with Tai Jin since the early years, looked briefly at Seung-rok. Seung-rok looked at the table. The meeting continued. Afterward, when the room had cleared except for Seung-rok, Tai Jin set the phone with the invitation face down on the table and looked at it the way he looked at operational problems, systematically, from multiple angles, looking for the move that existed even when the position appeared closed. "An engagement in 4 days," he said. Seung-rok sat across from him. "I saw the invitation. She did not mention it. She does not need your permission." "I know that." Tai Jin's voice was controlled, but the control was costing something. Seung-rok could hear the maintenance in it, the additional effort. "I am not questioning her right. I am questioning the timeline. 3 weeks ago, she was sitting across from me in a private lounge making a bet. She was not seeing anyone. Now there is an engagement celebration." Seung-rok said nothing. "How long has she known this man?" Tai Jin said. "I do not have that information." "You have met him." A pause. "Once. Briefly." "And?" Seung-rok looked at him for a moment before answering. "He seems decent. The kind of man who would be good to her." The words landed in the room with the particular weight of a sentence that is true and unwelcome in equal measure. Tai Jin stood up. He walked to the window of the conference room. A different window, a different view, the Han River visible in the distance, and stood with his hands in his pockets and his back to the room. "She withdrew from the bet," he said. "She said 2 dates proved I was right, that nothing happened." "Yes." "She was lying." Seung-rok was quiet. "She withdrew because I was not moving fast enough." Tai Jin's voice was not loud. It never needed to be loud. "She made the bet because she wanted to know if there was a possibility. When I did not give her a clear answer in 2 dates, she decided to stop waiting and manufacture a reason to walk away before she had to watch me stay exactly where I was." He turned from the window. "She has been in love with me, and I spent 2 dates half understanding it, and then she left before I could complete the thought." "That is probably accurate," Seung-rok said. "And now she is engaged. That is what the invitation says." Tai Jin crossed the room and picked up the phone and looked at the invitation again. The date. The venue. The 2 names arranged in the clean typography of an event that was meant to be official, permanent, real. He set the phone down. "I need you to tell me something honestly," he said. "When have I told you anything else?" "Is this over?" Tai Jin said. "Honestly, if she has made this decision, if this man is who she wants, Tell me honestly whether going to that event and saying what I need to say is something that helps her or something that is only about me. Sungrok looked at him for a long time. The question was real. Taijin was asking it with the same unflinching directness he brought to every significant evaluation, starting with himself, checking his own motives first, because bad decisions came from men who skipped that step. She loves you, Sungrok said finally. She has loved you for years. I do not believe 4 days changes that. He paused. But I also cannot tell you with certainty what she wants right now. People make decisions when they are exhausted that they would not make when they are hopeful. I do not know which version of her made this one. Taijin absorbed that. I am going, he said. I know. I am going to that event and I am going to tell her the truth, in front of whoever is there. I am done calculating the appropriate moment because the appropriate moment was 2 weeks ago, and I missed it by 11 minutes, standing in the rain outside her building. Sungrok stood up and adjusted his jacket. Do you want backup? He said. No. Emotional support? Something crossed Taijin's face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent. I'm going to tell a woman I love her at her engagement celebration. I think we are past the point where backup addresses the problem. Sungrok looked at him with the expression of a man who has known someone long enough to recognize the exact moment they stop being who they were. Then go, he said. Taijin looked at the invitation one final time. Saturday, 8 o'clock, rooftop. He had built an empire on the capacity to walk into rooms that frightened other people. He had never walked into one that frightened him. He put the phone in his pocket. This was the version of courage he had no training for. Not the kind that came with weapons or leverage or the machinery of power behind him. The kind that required him to enter a room with nothing except the truth and his willingness to say it in front of strangers to a woman who might have already chosen someone else. He had spent 34 years constructing a version of himself that did not require this kind of exposure. 4 days from now, he was going to dismantle it in public. He walked out of the syndicate hall into the afternoon light and felt the specific sensation of a man who has finally decided something that cannot be undecided. Not relief, not exactly, but something that lived in the same neighborhood as it. The city moved around him. He had 4 days. He was going to spend them figuring out not what to say, he already knew what to say, but how to be the man who deserved to say it. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment he was no longer permitted to visit without invitation, Suri Adebayo was presumably moving through her own day, and he did not know what she was feeling, and for the first time in a very long time, that uncertainty felt like the most important thing in the world to resolve. He got into the car. Take me home, he said. His driver pulled into traffic. The city closed around the sedan and Taijin sat in the back with the engagement invitation on his phone and the knowledge of what Saturday required sitting in his chest like something that had been waiting a long time to be acknowledged, heavy and necessary and entirely without the comfort of certainty, which was, he was beginning to understand, exactly what love felt like when it was real. The 4 days were the longest of his adult life. Not because they were empty, they were not empty. He filled them with the same relentless operational velocity that had always been his mechanism for managing anything that could not be immediately resolved. He approved the Busan port restructuring. He signed the acquisition documents that had been waiting on his desk. He conducted 2 disciplinary reviews within the syndicate that had been deferred for weeks, and both of those sessions concluded with outcomes that his captains later described as the most precise and unsentimental rulings they had witnessed in years. He was performing at absolute capacity. And underneath every meeting, every decision, every document, every room he walked into and commanded without apparent effort, underneath all of it, Saturday was counting down with the quiet persistence of something that could not be accelerated or deferred. He slept 4 hours Thursday night, 3 on Friday. He did not tell himself this was because of the situation. He told himself it was operational stress, accumulated pressure from the Busan restructuring, the normal cost of running an organization of this complexity. He was lying to himself, which was unusual. He was generally not the kind of man who permitted that. Sungrok called Friday evening. You should eat something real before tomorrow, he said, without preamble. I eat. Coffee and control are not food. Was there something operational you needed? No, Sungrok said. I called because you are the most self-sufficient person I have ever known, and you are about to do the one thing you have never done before, which is stand in a room full of people and say something true about yourself that has no tactical advantage whatsoever. A pause. I thought you might want someone to call. Taejin stood at the penthouse window with the phone against his ear and Sol below him and did not say anything for a moment. I do not know how to do this, he said. It was the most honest sentence he had said in possibly years. Seung-rok was quiet for a moment. You walk in, you find her, you say what is true, in that order. And if she has actually chosen him, then you say it anyway, because she deserves to know it regardless of what she decides. Another pause. And because you deserve to stop carrying it. Taejin looked at the city. What time are you arriving tomorrow? He said. I will be there before you, Seung-rok said. I am always before you. He hung up. Taejin stood at the window for another 20 minutes. Then he went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about a midnight blue dress and gold earrings catching city lights, and a woman who had looked at him across a restaurant table and told him to stop looking at her like his friend. He had not understood that night that she was asking him to stop lying to himself. He understood it now. Tomorrow, he was going to stop. Saturday arrived the way significant days, any atmospheric distinction from the day before, the rain from earlier in the week entirely gone, the sky over Seoul pale and clear in the early morning and warming by noon into the kind of afternoon that felt deliberately designed for outdoor events. Taejin dressed carefully. Not the way he dressed for syndicate meetings, with the weight of institutional authority built into every layer. Not the way he dressed for business negotiations, where the suit was a form of armor. He chose something darker, simpler. A black suit, no tie, the collar open exactly one button, the whole assembly saying I came as myself, rather than as the institution I have spent 2 decades building. He stood in front of the mirror for a moment. He looked like what he was, a man in his mid-30s who had survived things that should have killed him and built things he had not been supposed to build, who was about to do the most frightening thing he had ever done, which was walk into a room with no weapons and no leverage and no tactical position and say I was wrong and I love you and I am sorry it took me 10 years. He turned from the mirror. He did not take the armored sedan. He took an ordinary car driven by himself, which he had not done in years. Seung-rok had offered 3 times to arrange transportation with appropriate security. Taejin had refused 3 times. He needed to arrive alone. He needed the drive to be silent and his. Because once he walked into that rooftop, the silence was going to end, and he wanted the last 20 minutes of it. He drove through Seoul with his windows down slightly, the city air cool against his forearm, both hands on the wheel, and did not turn on the radio. He thought about Zuri at 22 walking into his office with documents that exposed embezzlement 3 other professionals had missed. The precision of her. The complete absence of performance. She had laid the documents down and explained what she had found and looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who had already decided they were competent enough for this room and was simply waiting to see if he agreed. He had agreed. He had agreed every day for 10 years. He just had not understood what he was agreeing to. The hotel on Yeouido came into view through the windshield. Glass and light, the upper floors catching the last of the afternoon sun, the rooftop already visible as a dark edge against the sky with warm event lighting beginning to glow against the growing dusk. He found parking 2 blocks away. He sat in the car for 90 seconds. Then he got out. He could hear the event before he reached the rooftop, the specific hum of a gathered crowd, music at a level designed for conversation rather than dancing, the occasional sharp edge of laughter from somewhere above. The elevator opened on the top floor and a hotel staff member in a black jacket moved to intercept him with the practiced smile of someone whose job was to manage access. Taejin looked at him. The staff member stepped aside. He walked to the rooftop entrance. The space opened in front of him like something arranged. The Seoul skyline burning behind it in bands of orange and amber and deep blue. The city's tower lights beginning to punctuate the darkening sky. The rooftop itself strung with warm overhead lights that turned everything gold. Round tables. Flowers. People in formal wear holding champagne glasses and performing the social rituals of celebration. Maybe 80 guests. Maybe more. He scanned the crowd with the automatic, efficient assessment of a man who had spent decades reading rooms for threats. Except the threat calculus was entirely different tonight. He was looking for one person. He found her. She was standing near the far edge of the rooftop. The city spread behind her, wearing a white dress that caught the overhead lights the way the midnight blue dress had caught the restaurant light 3 weeks ago. And beside her was Darius Cole. Easy posture, slight smile, the body language of a man who was comfortable in the space he occupied. Something moved through Taijin's chest. Not jealousy this time, something more specific and more painful than jealousy. Something that was awareness. The awareness of how much he had nearly allowed himself to lose. The awareness of the distance between where he was standing and where she was standing. The awareness that crossing that distance in the next few minutes was going to require something from him that he had never given anyone. He began moving through the crowd. People registered him. He could feel it. The specific shift in a room when the architecture of its social hierarchy has suddenly been reorganized. Guests turned slightly. Conversations paused at the edges. A few people who knew him by sight made the particular micro-adjustment of people who are not certain whether to acknowledge him or pretend they have not noticed. He did not look at any of them. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who has made a decision and is executing it, and the crowd opened for him the way crowds opened. Not because he demanded it, but because something in the quality of his movement communicated that he was not stopping regardless. Darius saw him first. He was looking in Taijin's direction when Taijin was still 15 feet away, and his expression went through something: recognition, assessment, a brief flash of something that might have been uncertainty, before settling into a careful neutrality. Then Zuri turned. She saw him and went very still. She was holding a champagne glass, and she did not lower it and she did not raise it. She simply held it and looked at him approaching across the rooftop with an expression he could not immediately read. Not fear, not anger, something more layered than both. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she did not have to raise her voice, far enough that she had room to choose. "I can't let you marry him," he said. The words came out exactly as he had not quite planned them. Direct, stripped of preamble, the sentence he had been carrying for 4 days arriving without ceremony. The rooftop went quiet in stages. The nearest conversation stopped first, then the ripple of silence moved outward as the words and the situation registered, and within 10 seconds the 80-odd guests on the rooftop were operating at dramatically reduced volume with the collective awareness of a crowd that has understood something significant is occurring. Zuri looked at him. Her face was still doing that unreadable thing, layered and careful, and the champagne glass was still in her hand and she had not spoken. Taijin breathed. Then he did something that was for him more difficult than anything the previous 34 years had required. He let go of control. Not completely. Not in the way of a man who has broken. In the way of a man who has decided that the protection is costing more than what it is protecting and has made a deliberate choice to put it down. "I was wrong," he said. The words were quiet. Not performing quietness, not using restraint as a strategy. Just quiet, because what he was saying did not require volume. "I spent my entire life dividing everything into categories. Every person, every situation, every risk." He held her gaze. "I did it with you. I put you in a category and built reasons around it, and called those reasons truth, because admitting anything else meant admitting that I could not control what I felt." He paused. "What I felt. Not what was culturally appropriate or strategically sound or practically manageable. What I actually felt." Zuri had not moved. "You have been beside me for 10 years, he said. "You knew things about me before I knew them about myself. You rebuilt what my enemies destroyed. You sat outside a hospital for 9 hours after Daejeon and did not tell me you were there, which I found out 3 days ago. And the fact that I did not know until 3 days ago is—" He stopped. Restarted. "It tells you more about my blindness than anything else I could say." Something crossed her face. He kept going, because stopping now would mean he had come this far and retreated, and retreat was not the option he had chosen. "I do not want to erase the 10 years. I cannot do that, and I would not if I could, because those years are the part of my life with the most—" He stopped again, searching for the accurate word rather than the impressive one. "The most actual content, the most genuine content." He exhaled. "I love you. I have been failing to recognize it as that specific thing for a long time, which is an inexcusable failure of perception in a man who prides himself on accurate perception, and I am not here to argue that I deserve another chance." He did not look away. "I am here because you deserve to hear the truth, even if it changes nothing, and because I could not sit in a room somewhere and let you make the most permanent decision of your life, while I still had something true that I had never said." The rooftop was nearly silent. The city moved beyond the railing, its lights and distance and magnificent indifference. And on the rooftop, 80 people were holding various positions of suspended animation, champagne glasses arrested mid-lift, conversations abandoned at incomplete sentences, the entire apparatus of a celebration holding its breath. Zuri looked at him. Then she began to cry. Not dramatically. Not the performative emotion of someone playing to a room. Her eyes filled and the tears came quietly, the way emotion comes when it has been compressed for a long time and finally finds a surface to move through. And she pressed her lips together and looked at him with the specific expression of a person who has been waiting for something for so long that the arrival of it does not feel like relief yet. It felt like the lifting of something very heavy. Then, from somewhere to Taejin's left, someone began laughing. It was a real laugh, a full, delighted, uncontrolled laugh. And it was the most unexpected sound in the most unexpected moment, and Taejin turned toward it with the reflex of a man whose threat assessment never fully stopped. It was Seung-rok. Han Seung-rok, who had been standing near one of the outer tables with his arms folded and apparently enjoying himself considerably, was laughing in the way of a man watching the conclusion of something he has had a front-row seat to for years. Taejin looked at him. Seung-rok straightened, composed himself partially, and then looked over Taejin's shoulder with an expression that communicated something. Taejin turned back. Darius Cole was smiling. Not the tight, managed smile of a man in an uncomfortable situation. A genuine smile. The kind that involved his whole face, that belonged to someone who was not in any emotional difficulty whatsoever, that indicated, with absolute clarity, that the man currently standing beside Zuri Adebayo at what was supposed to be their engagement celebration was not experiencing the feelings of a person whose future had just been publicly challenged. The silence on the rooftop shifted. Something was recalibrating. Taejin looked at Darius. Then he looked at Seung-rok. Then he looked at Zuri, who had stopped crying, whose expression was no longer unreadable. It was open and complicated, and underneath the complication was something that looked very much like the answer to a question he had not realized was still pending. "There is no engagement," Taejin said. It was not a question. Zuri wiped her face with the back of her hand. Not elegantly, just practically. The gesture of someone who has more important things to manage than elegance, and exhaled. "There is no engagement," she confirmed. Taejin processed this. He looked at Darius again. "Who are you?" Darius extended his hand with the easy confidence of a man who has been enjoying himself and has no reason not to continue. "Old friend of Seung-rok's. I have been in Seoul 3 months. He called me about a month ago with what he described as the most interesting favor anyone had asked him in years." A pause. He was not wrong. Taejin did not shake the hand immediately. He stood with this information settling over him the way information settled when it reorganized everything that had preceded it. The corridor, the expensive suit and the easy posture and the neutral nod. The background file his intelligence division had assembled. Legitimate, clean, no complications, because there were no complications. Because Darius Cole was exactly what the file said he was. A decent man with a clean record who had agreed to participate in a carefully constructed deception. Taejin looked at Seung-rok. Seung-rok had the expression of a man who is entirely aware that he is responsible for something that could go several directions and has calculated that most of those directions are acceptable. "You organized this," Taejin said. "Zuri organized it," Seung-rok said. "I provided the resource." He nodded toward Darius. "And the actor." "I prefer consultant," Darius said pleasantly. Taejin looked at Zuri. She met his gaze steadily. She had composed herself. The tears were gone, or contained, and what was left was the direct, clear-eyed, unflinching version of her that he had known for a decade, and that apparently, he now understood, he had loved for nearly as long without the vocabulary for it. "You needed to know if it was real," he said. Not an accusation, a statement of understanding, the click of something accurate arriving. "I needed to know if it was real," she said. "Not the bet, not the excitement of dates, not the novelty." She held his gaze. "I needed to know if you could feel the absence of me. If I actually meant something specific to you, or if I was just present, available, familiar. Her voice was steady. I have been one of the most available people in your life for 10 years. I needed to know whether you would notice if I stopped. I noticed, he said. I know, she said. You stood in the rain for 11 minutes. Sung-rok, apparently, had reported everything. Tae-jin looked at him. 11 minutes, Sung-rok said, unapologetically. In the rain. I felt it was relevant data. And then, Zuri continued, her voice dropping slightly, not for privacy, but for weight, the way voices drop when they are carrying the thing that actually matters. You showed up tonight, without your guards, without your procession, without any of the… She gestured vaguely at the air between them, indicating the vast invisible machinery of his power, apparatus. Just you. Just me, he said. Just you, she said, standing in front of 80 people saying things that Kwon Tae-jin does not say. He looked at her. You manipulated me, he said. Yes, she said, using the 2 people I trust enough to survive it. Yes. And if it had not worked, he said, if I had not come tonight. Something moved through her face. A shadow, brief and real, the evidence of the risk she had actually taken. Then I would have known, she said, and I would have moved forward with a clear answer instead of a decade of hoping. The rooftop had begun to breathe again around them, guests shifting, a few quiet conversations restarting at the periphery. The awareness that the immediate crisis of the moment had resolved into something that was no longer a crisis. But the center of it, the 2 of them, and the distance between them, and what the distance now contained, that was still suspended. Tae-jin reached up and took the champagne glass from her hand. He held it for a moment, looking at it, then set it on the nearest table without ceremony. Then he looked at her with no barrier between the looking and what it meant. He had spent 34 years making sure no room could see what he felt. He was done with that. I have been looking at you wrong for 10 years, he said. I do not know exactly when it became what it is. I do not think it happened at once. I think it was every time you argued with me when everyone else was afraid to. Every time you rebuilt something my enemies had destroyed. Every time you sat in a room with me and were exactly what you were without performing it. He paused. I think I loved you, and I filed it somewhere I did not have to examine it, because examining it meant I had to examine what I believed was simply true about myself and about what was possible. He exhaled. I was wrong about what was possible. Zuri looked at him. I was wrong about more than possible, she said quietly. I should have said it years ago. I should not have made it a bet. I should have just… She stopped. But I was afraid. Of this. Of standing in a room and saying it and watching your face do the thing it does when you are being careful. She looked at him. Except your face is not doing that right now. No, he said. What is it doing? Whatever it does when it stops hiding, he said. Behind them, Seung-rok said something very quietly to Darius that made Darius laugh again. And the laughter was warm and real, and the guests on the rooftop were beginning to relax into the recalibrated atmosphere of an event that had not gone wrong so much as it had gone somewhere none of them had expected, which was, in its own way, more interesting. Tae-jin opened his arms. Not a grand gesture, not performed, just open. The way a person opens when they have decided that the thing they were protecting themselves from was actually the thing they needed. Zuri looked at his face for one more moment. She was looking for hesitation, he understood. Looking for the micro-expression of a man who has said something real and is already beginning to manage it back into something he can control. She did not find it. She stepped forward. She stepped into his arms and he closed them around her and felt the specific weight of her. Real, present, warm, breathing. And she pressed her face briefly against his shoulder the way she had in the Storm Hotel. Except this time she was not asleep and he was not watching from the outside. And there was no distance between what he felt and what he allowed himself to acknowledge about it. He held her. The city burned beyond the railing. The guests on the rooftop existed in the quiet after a significant thing, the specific hush of people who have witnessed something they will describe to others later, with the particular emphasis of those who were present for it. Sung-rok was not laughing anymore. He was watching with the expression of a man who has known 2 people for a long time and has wanted this specific outcome for most of that time, and is now managing the feeling of it with mixed success. His eyes were considerably more wet than he would have preferred. Darius noticed and said nothing, which was why Seung-rok had always liked him. Taejin and Zuri stood on the rooftop in the middle of an engagement celebration that had never been an engagement celebration, and the city moved around them the way it always moved, and the warm lights overhead made everything look like the kind of moment people spend years trying to construct, and occasionally, if they are honest enough and stubborn enough and finally brave enough, stumble into by accident. After a while, she pulled back enough to look at him. Her eyes were still wet at the edges. "You are aware," she said, "that you owe me a third date." He looked at her. Something happened in his face. The thing that happened when it stopped hiding settled further, into something that his staff would not have recognized, and that Seung-rok, across the rooftop, saw clearly and catalogued quietly under the heading of things he would not mention for a long time. It was, unmistakably, a smile. Not the controlled, minimal expression that Kwon Tae-jin deployed in professional contexts as a social tool, a real one, the kind that arrived without calculation. "I owe you more than that," he said. She held his gaze, one thing at a time. Behind them, the event that had been a trap and a test and a declaration all at once began to reorganize itself into something closer to an actual celebration. Guests circulating again, the music finding its level, champagne glasses lifting with the recovered ease of a crowd that has processed a shock and decided to enjoy the rest of the evening. And in the middle of it, Kwon Tae-jin stood with his arms around the woman who had known him longest and seen him most clearly and loved him across 10 years without requiring him to deserve it first, and felt, for the first time in his adult life, that the most dangerous room he had ever walked into was also the only one that had ever asked him to be entirely himself. He had walked in. He had survived it. He was not going anywhere. The rooftop did not empty quickly. That was the thing about moments that reorganize the atmosphere of a room. The people inside them did not simply shake it off and return to normal social calibration. They moved differently afterward, more carefully, with the particular self-consciousness of guests who had been witnesses to something that was not meant for them and were now navigating the delicate protocol of pretending they had not been. Taejin was aware of all of it. He was always aware of rooms. It was not something he could turn off. But for the first time in memory, being aware of the room was a secondary operation running beneath something primary. And the primary thing was the woman standing beside him, with her shoulder against his arm, and her composure rebuilt into something that looked like her usual composure, but was slightly different, like a wall that has been taken apart and reassembled by someone who now understands the structure from the inside. Darius Cole appeared at his elbow with 2 glasses of champagne and extended one toward Tae-jin with the easy confidence of a man who had decided they were going to be fine with each other. Tae-jin looked at the glass. Then he took it. "You are a good actor," he said. "Consultant," Darius said. "The corridor, the nod. You walked past me like I was furniture." "You walked past me like I was furniture first," Darius said pleasantly. "I was matching the energy." He lifted his own glass. "For what it is worth, I said yes to Seung-rok because she told me the situation. The whole situation. 10 years of it." He looked at Tae-jin with the direct gaze of a man who had decided that social filtering was unnecessary at this point in the evening. She is the kind of person people do not come across often, the kind that deserves someone who actually sees her. He paused. "I'm glad you figured it out." Tae-jin looked at him for a moment. "So am I," he said. They drank. Across the rooftop, Zuri was talking to a small group of guests, friends, from the body language, people who had been in on the setup to various degrees and were now performing the social ritual of celebration with the released energy of people whose secret had finally been allowed to exist in the open. Her hands moved when she talked. They always did when she was with people she was comfortable with. He had watched this for years without noting it as something specific. He noted it now. Seung-rok materialized beside him with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been managing Tae-jin's vicinity for 2 decades. "You are watching her," Seung-rok said. "I am aware of that." "You have been watching her for 10 years. "I am aware of that too," Tae-jin said. "Now." Seung-rok was quiet for a moment. He drank from his glass. "How does it feel?" Tae-jin considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because Seung-rok was one of the 4 people in his life to whom he owed honest answers. "Like finding something I did not know I had lost," he said. which is a worse feeling than losing something you knew about, because at least that has a clear beginning. But you found it. I found it, Taijin said. Then the beginning is now, Sungrok said simply. Taijin looked at him. Sungrok was not a sentimental man. He had operated in violent environments for 20 years, and he had a precise, unsentimental relationship with reality that Taijin had always respected. The fact that he could say something like that, the beginning is now, without it sounding like a greeting card, without it collapsing under its own weight, meant that it was simply accurate. You should have told me, Taijin said, earlier about what she felt. Sungrok met his eyes. It was not mine to tell. You knew for years. Yes. And you said nothing. She asked me not to. He held Taijin's gaze steadily. She said if you could not see it yourself, she did not want it handed to you. She wanted it to be something you chose to look at. A pause. She is that kind of person. Taijin looked back across the rooftop at her. She was laughing at something now. One of her real laughs. The one that was slightly too loud for the setting and completely unaware of being too loud. The one that arrived before she could decide whether to contain it. He had heard that laugh for 10 years. He felt it differently now. The beginning is now, he said quietly, mostly to himself. Sungrok refilled his champagne glass without being asked. They stayed until most of the guests had gone. This was not planned. There was no plan for the aftermath, no scheduled next step, no strategic framework for what happened on a rooftop in Seoul after a man walked into a fake engagement celebration and dismantled a decade of his own assumptions in front of 80 witnesses. What happened was simpler than strategy. They stayed because neither of them moved to leave, and at some point the catering staff began quietly clearing tables around the remaining handful of guests, and the overhead lights shifted from warm gold to something more practical, and the city beyond the railing was fully dark and fully lit. Simultaneously, the way Seoul always was, the darkness and the light coexisting in the specific arrangement that made the city look like something that had decided to stay up all night for its own reasons. Zuri's friends left in a group of 3, hugging her with the particular warmth of people who have watched someone they love do something difficult and well. One of them, a Korean woman who looked at Taijin with the brief, frank assessment of someone who had heard about him for years and was now performing her own evaluation, shook his hand before leaving and said in English, "Take care of her," with a tone that was not a request. "Yes," he said. She held his hand one extra second. Then she let go and left. Darius and Seong-rok departed together, Darius with a final nod at Taijin that carried genuine warmth, Seong-rok with the understated exit of a man who knew when his presence was no longer the point. At the door, Seong-rok paused and turned back once. He looked at Taijin across the emptying rooftop with the expression of a man reviewing 40 years of shared history. The years before Taijin's empire, the violent years of building it, the long years of maintaining it, all the rooms they had stood in together with their backs against various walls. And then he nodded once, with the economy of meaning that only existed between people who had been in enough difficult places together that a single gesture could carry everything. Taijin nodded back. Sungrok left. And then it was the 2 of them on the rooftop with the catering staff working quietly at the periphery, and Seoul spread in every direction below, and the particular silence of a night that had already decided to be significant and was now simply continuing to be. Zuri walked to the railing. She stood with both hands resting on the metal and looked out at the city, and Taijin came and stood beside her with his forearms on the railing and looked out alongside her, and neither of them spoke for a moment. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had known each other for a long time and had just reorganized every category they had ever used to understand that knowing, and were now sitting with the reorganization the way you sit with any significant structural change, not in a hurry, because hurrying it would not make it more real, only less considered. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You gave one, on the rooftop, in front of 80 people. That was a declaration. He looked at the city. "This is an apology. They are different things." She was quiet. "What I said that night in the lounge," he said. "The way I said it, not thinking about who was in the room." He paused, organizing the sentence so it was accurate rather than impressive. "I had never examined it. The assumption. It had been there so long it had become invisible to me, like furniture you have had so long you stop seeing it. He turned slightly toward her. That is not an excuse. I am telling you the mechanics of it because you deserve an honest account, not because the mechanics make it acceptable. Zuri looked at him. It landed, she said. I know. I smiled and I sat there and I let you finish and I thought, she stopped, restarted. I thought, you have known me for 7 years at that point, 7 years. You have seen me work and argue and navigate your world and handle things that would break people who thought they were stronger than me. Her voice was level, but the level quality was doing work. She was holding it there deliberately. And the category you put me in had nothing to do with any of that. No, he said. It did not. It had to do with what I looked like. Yes. Which means for 7 years, she stopped again, looked back at the city. For 7 years, I could have been anyone. I could have been someone half as good, and it would not have mattered, because the wall was not about competence or character or any of the things I had spent years building. The wall was built before I met you, he said. That does not make it acceptable. I am saying it because you should know it was never actually about you specifically, which does not make it hurt less. I understand that, but the origin matters. It was not a judgment of you. It was a failure of me. She was quiet for a moment. I know that, she said. I knew that then, actually. That was the worst part. She glanced at him. I could see exactly what it was. I could see the architecture of it clearly, where it came from, what it was made of, the fact that it was not personal in origin. She looked back at the city, and knowing that did not change what it felt like, because it was still a wall between me and something I wanted. Yes. And I had to decide, she said, whether to stay beside the wall and hope it moved, or find a door, or walk away entirely. She exhaled. I kept choosing the first option, for years, which was its own kind of decision. Taejin looked at the side of her face. Why? He said. She turned to look at him. The question was genuine, and she could see that it was, and the genuine quality of it seemed to settle something in her. The recognition that he was asking not to be reassured, but to understand. Because what was on the other side of the wall was worth waiting for, she said. You. Not the chairman, not the crime boss, not the version of yourself that walks into rooms and makes everyone recalibrate. She held his gaze. The man who remembered that I skip lunch when I am overwhelmed. The man who told me about a dog he had when he was 12 like it still mattered. The man who told stories during a storm until I fell asleep. She paused. That man was worth considerable patience. He did not say anything immediately. He held what she said the way he held things that mattered, not analyzing them, just holding them, letting their weight be what it was. You should have had more than patience, he said. Yes, she said simply. I should have. The city moved below them. Somewhere in the middle distance, a siren passed and faded. The wind off the river was cool and steady, and neither of them moved from the railing. What happens now? She said. He looked at her. I take you to dinner. She almost laughed. Now? In 3 days. I know a place. He held her gaze. No wager, no terms, no arrangement. One dinner, because I want to have dinner with you, and I want it to be on record that that is the reason. She looked at him for a moment. You are asking me on a date. I am asking you on a date. The corner of her mouth moved. Kwon Tae-jin asking for things he wants directly. That is new. It is going to become less new, he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Yes, she said. Yes to dinner, or yes to it becoming less new? Both, she said. He looked at her. The city burned behind her, and the lights overhead had finished their shift from gold to practical, and somewhere on the rooftop a staff member was folding the last of the event linens and doing it quietly, with the professional discretion of someone who understood the room. And Kwon Tae-jin stood at a railing in Seoul with the woman he had spent 10 years looking at incorrectly, and felt something that he did not attempt to name or categorize or file into any of the systems he had spent his entire life constructing. He just felt it. That was new too. 3 days later, he took her to dinner. The restaurant was not what she expected, which was, in its own way, the point. It was small, 12 tables, ground floor of an unremarkable building in a neighborhood that Seoul's luxury district pretended did not exist. The kind of place that did not have a digital presence because it did not need one, because the people who knew about it had found it by word of mouth passed between people who understood what they were talking about. The owner was a Korean woman in her late 60s who had trained in Lagos for 3 years in her 20s and come home with a cuisine that was not quite Korean and not quite Nigerian and entirely its own. Dishes built on the structural logic of Korean cooking with the spice architecture of West African flavors, fermented pastes meeting palm oil and crayfish, the heat of both traditions negotiating with each other in every mouthful. When Taijin had called to make the reservation, the owner had asked who recommended him. He had told her the name of the chef who had sent him. She had given him a table without further discussion. There were no guards at the door. He had arrived before Zuri, which meant he had been there when she walked in. No armored sedan, no entourage, just Zuri in a coat over a dark dress with her bag over one shoulder, looking at the restaurant's unpretentious exterior with the expression of someone revising their expectations, and then pushing through the door and seeing him at the corner table and something in her face settling into something warm. "This is not the restaurant I would have predicted," she said, sitting down. That was the intention. She looked around. The other tables were occupied by people who appeared to have no interest in anyone else. Couples, a family group in the corner, 2 older men in deep conversation over a single dish. The smell of the kitchen was extraordinary, layered, the specific fragrance of food that has been made by someone who learned it as a language rather than a technique. "How did you find it?" she said. "I have been looking for something like it for 3 weeks," he said. "Since the hotel, since the pepper soup." He looked at her directly. "I wanted somewhere that had both of our worlds in the same plate. I did not want to take you somewhere only mine." She looked at him. 3 weeks, she said. "I started looking the morning after the hotel night," he said, "before I fully understood why." She was quiet for a moment. Processing, he recognized. The same focused processing she brought to financial documents, to complex problems. Except this time, the complexity was personal, and the stakes were things that could not be expressed in columns. "You started looking before you admitted to yourself what you felt," she said. "Apparently my behavior knew before my reasoning did," he said. She exhaled something that was almost a laugh. "That is the most revealing thing you have ever said about yourself." "I am aware." Taejin Kwan, admitting his instincts, outran his intellect. She shook her head slightly. "I want that in writing." "You have it in a restaurant reservation," he said. "That will have to suffice." The owner came herself to take their order, which was not something she did for every table. She looked at Zuri with the particular attention of a woman who had spent decades reading rooms and people and knew immediately what she was looking at, and she said something in Korean to Taejin that made him respond briefly, and then she looked at Zuri again and nodded once with an expression that communicated both approval and a specific kind of knowing. When she left, Zuri raised an eyebrow. "What did she say?" "She said you have the face of someone who has waited a long time for something they deserved sooner." Zuri was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "I said yes." She looked at her water glass. "She is not wrong," she said. "No," he said. "She is not." The food arrived in stages. Small plates first, then larger ones, each one landing on the table and reorganizing the air around it, the kitchen's specific genius evident in everything, the way heat and fat and fermentation created depth that neither cuisine could have built alone, the way the combination asked something of the person eating it, required attention, rewarded it. Taejin watched Zuri eat, not conspicuously, not in the way of a man performing observation, just present to it. The way her expression changed when a flavor landed correctly. The way she broke a piece of bread and considered the interior of it before eating it. The way she refilled her own water glass and then, without thinking, refilled his. She had been doing that last thing for 10 years, filling his glass. He had accepted it 100 times without noting it as an act of care. He noted it now. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You have been asking me things all evening," she said. "The pattern is established." "The night in the lounge. When I said what I said," he held her gaze. "Your face did not change." She was quiet. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "I have replayed it many times in the past few weeks. Your face did not change. You smiled and you waited and then you made the bet." He paused. "How long had you been practicing that?" She set down her fork. Since I was a child, she said. He waited. When you are the kind of person who moves through the world the way I move through it, she said slowly, you learn early that your face is information, that people read it and respond to what they find there, and that the response is not always something you want. She looked at him. I learned to hold my face a certain way in certain rooms, not to lie, not exactly, but to give myself time, to not hand people my reaction before I had decided what to do with it. That night, he said. That night I needed time, she said. I needed to decide whether I was going to walk out or cry or do what I did. She picked up her fork again. I chose the bet, but the choice took approximately 30 seconds, and I could not afford for you to see the 30 seconds. What was in the 30 seconds? He said. She looked at him. The restaurant moved around them. A child at the family table laughed at something. The two older men continued their conversation at the same steady register. The kitchen produced its quiet, fragrant industry behind the service door. Grief, she said. Briefly. The specific kind that arrives when something you were still hoping for becomes clearly, formally unlikely. She held his gaze. And then anger. Quieter than the grief, but more useful. She tilted her head slightly. And then something I can only describe as clarity. Like when you have been looking at a blurred image for a long time and someone adjusts the focus and suddenly you can see exactly what you are dealing with. And what were you dealing with, he said. A man who had built a wall so thoroughly into his worldview that he could not see it from the inside, she said. And the question of whether there was any mechanism capable of showing it to him from the outside. She paused. The bet was my answer to that question. Taejin looked at her. He had known this woman for 10 years. He had sat across from her in crisis rooms and ordinary rooms, and rooms that should have been ordinary but were not. And he had understood, he had always understood, that she was extraordinary in specific, concrete ways. But the particular quality of what she was describing, the 30 seconds of controlled grief, the anger refined into strategy, the clarity that converted pain into action, that was something he had not had the correct angle to see before. She had done, in 30 seconds and in private, what he did in crisis situations with preparation and infrastructure and a room full of people. She had done it alone, with a champagne glass in her hand and a smile on her face. You are remarkable, he said. She blinked. It was a small thing, the brief involuntary response of someone who was not expecting that specific word from that specific person, and then she recovered and looked at him steadily. I know, she said. He almost smiled. That was not arrogance. No, she agreed. It was not. It took me a long time to know it without arrogance, actually. Knowing it cleanly, without ego or apology. She looked at him. My mother told me when I was young that remarkable was not something you apologized for. She said women in our family had been apologizing for being too much for too many generations, and she was finished with it. She paused. She was right. She sounds like she was extraordinary. She was, Zuri said, simply. No performance of grief, no protective distancing. She was the first person who ever made me feel like my full size was the correct size. Not too much, not requiring adjustment. She looked at her plate for a moment. I have been looking for rooms that felt that way ever since. Taejin held what she said. Does my world feel like that? He said. She looked up. Your world has felt like many things over 10 years. Demanding, complicated, occasionally dangerous in ways I chose not to examine too closely. She met his eyes. But you, when you are actually present, actually there, not managing me or categorizing me or fitting me into the organizational logic of your empire, yes. A pause. Yes. You make me feel like my full size is the correct size. He held her gaze. Then I need to be actually there more consistently, he said. That would be the direction I would recommend, she said. They ate in the comfortable, textured silence of people who have run out of things to perform and are simply present with each other. And the food continued to arrive and continued to be extraordinary. And the restaurant moved around them in its own quiet rhythm, and neither of them looked at a phone or checked the time or did any of the things people do when a part of them is somewhere else. They were both entirely there. Over the weeks that followed, things changed, not all at once. Not in the clean, dramatic fashion of stories that prefer their transformations visible and immediate. Real change is slower and less photogenic. It happens in the accumulation of small decisions made consistently in the same direction, each one unremarkable on its own, collectively irreversible. Taejin began dismantling. He started with the most dangerous operational divisions of the syndicate, not abruptly, not in ways that would destabilize the organization catastrophically, but with the methodical, unglamorous work of transition, redirecting revenue into legitimate channels, retiring captains who could be retired without consequence, declining operations that crossed lines he had previously managed rather than eliminated. Sung-rok managed most of the operational transition. He had been expecting it, in the way that people who pay close attention to the people they serve expect things that those people have not yet consciously decided. He did not express surprise. He executed. The Quan Meridian legitimate empire, the logistics, the hospitality, the investment portfolio, expanded in direct proportion to what was contracted from the other side. The transition was not painless. There were internal challenges, captains who pushed back, external parties who interpreted the shift as weakness, and had to be corrected in the specific ways that Taejin had always been willing to correct such interpretations. But the direction was clear. He had decided he would not ask Zuri to love a man who made her life require the kind of tolerance that loyalty to dangerous things always required. She had already tolerated enough. 10 years of proximity to operations she understood, but had never been complicit in. An arrangement that had asked her to stay and never asked whether the staying was costing her. He was not willing to keep that cost on the table. He told her what he was doing over dinner one Tuesday, 3 weeks into the process. She listened the way she listened to everything, completely, with her face doing the work of genuine reception, not composing a response while he was still speaking. When he finished, she said, "You did not have to do this for me." "I know," he said. "I am not asking you to dismantle." "I know," he said again. "I did not say I was doing it for you. I said I was doing it." He looked at her. "The reason is that I have been building things for 20 years, and some of those things should not have been built, and I had reasons for not examining that carefully, and the reasons were mostly about what I was using the organization to avoid feeling." He held her gaze. "I am not avoiding it anymore, which means I no longer need the structure I built around the avoidance." She looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said carefully, "is the most self-aware sentence I have ever heard you say. I have been practicing." "Who have you been practicing with?" "You," he said. "Mostly. In my head. Imagining what you would say if I gave you the managed version and having the argument you would make in response." He paused. "You are very persuasive even when you are not present." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to know that I was not waiting for you to be perfect. I was not waiting for the syndicate to disappear or for you to become someone without a complicated history." She held his gaze steadily. "I fell in love with the man who had all of that. Not despite it, with it. Because the history is part of the architecture of who you are, and I was in love with the architecture." "I know," he said. "But some of the architecture should have come down years ago, and I am taking it down now." He paused. "Not for your approval. For mine." She held his gaze. "Good," she said simply. They finished dinner. Outside the restaurant, she reached for his hand, and he gave it, and they walked 2 blocks to where the car was parked with the unhurried pace of people who have nowhere specific to be and are in the company they most want to be in, and the city moved around them with its indifferent midnight energy. The private ceremony took place on a Saturday, 6 weeks after the rooftop. It was not an event. It was not organized to impress anyone or signal anything to any external party. It was 11 people in a room, family members who had traveled, Seung-rok, Darius, 3 people Zuri had called when she wanted to tell the truth about her life, 2 people Taejin trusted in the complete way he trusted almost nobody. The room was a private floor of the smallest of his hotels, the one where they had sheltered from the storm, chosen deliberately and without discussion, a location that both of them recognized the significance of, and neither of them felt the need to explain. Zuri wore a dress the color of cream and carried nothing except her own hands, which she kept folded in front of her with the composed certainty of someone who had decided exactly what she wanted and was done waiting for permission to have it. Taejin wore a dark suit and no tie, and stood at the end of the room, looking at her coming toward him with an expression that his captains would not have recognized, and that Seung-rok, standing to his left, absorbed quietly and filed in the same interior location where he kept everything he chose to carry rather than say. Sungrok was crying before she reached the front of the room. He was doing it with the controlled dignity of a man who was aware he was crying and had decided that awareness was not sufficient reason to stop. Darius, standing beside him, noticed and said nothing and handed him a folded pocket square without looking at him. Sungrok took it without looking at Darius. They stood side by side with the easy, silent understanding of men who had spent one significant month pretending at something and ended up with an actual friendship from it. Zuri reached Tae-jin. She stopped in front of him and looked at his face the way she had looked at it on the rooftop, searching for the managed version, for the controlled surface, and found what she had found there, the real version. The one that had been available for 10 years to anyone who knew where to look, who had a decade of accumulated context for reading it correctly. She had always known where to look. He took both of her hands. They were warm, steady. They did not tremble, which did not surprise him because she was not the kind of person whose hands trembled. She was the kind of person who made the decision first and experienced the feeling of it afterward, in private, in the specific silence that followed resolution. His hands were steady too, for different reasons. Not because he was suppressing anything, because he was entirely sure, in a way he had not been entirely sure of anything in a very long time, and certainty of this kind, the kind that arrived through honest reckoning rather than constructed confidence, did not tremble. The ceremony was simple. It was the words and the meaning behind them and the witnesses and nothing else. And when he spoke the specific words that the moment required, he said them looking directly at her face, not performing them toward a room, because the room was not the point. She was the point. She had always been the point. When she spoke her own words, she said them in the same direct, unhesitating way. She said everything that mattered, without preamble, without qualification, with the full weight of her meaning behind each syllable, and he held her hands and felt each word land with the specific gravity of something true spoken aloud in a room full of witnesses. Sungrok needed the pocket square twice more. The third time he reached for it, Darius had already extended it, and Sungrok took it and said very quietly, "Not one word." "I have said nothing," Darius said. "Not one word," Sungrok repeated. Darius pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling and held his composure with the sustained effort of a man fighting something genuine. Afterward, they ate. The hotel kitchen had been given specific instructions, a menu that moved between Korean and Nigerian flavors the way the restaurant they had found moved between them, not as a novelty, but as a statement, as the simple acknowledgement that two people from different places could share a table and feed each other without either of them becoming less. Zuri's aunt, her mother's younger sister, who had flown from Atlanta and who looked at Tae-jin with the careful, thorough assessment of a woman who had been the person Zuri called in difficult years, and who therefore had opinions about the man who had contributed to some of those difficulties, sat across from him after dinner and spoke to him for 40 minutes. She did not soften anything. She told him, in the measured and relentless way of a woman who had spent 60 years deciding what deserved her patience and what did not, exactly what the previous decade had looked like from outside it. She described, with specific and unhurried detail, phone calls she had received from Zuri over the years. Not complaints. Zuri did not complain, but the particular kind of conversation a person has when they are carrying something heavy and cannot name it directly, and the person on the other end of the call knows precisely what is not being said. Tae-jin listened. He did not defend himself. He did not explain or contextualize or offer the architecture of his former blindness as mitigation. He simply listened and held the information and let it be what it was, which was an accurate accounting of what his failure to see had cost a person he loved. When she finished, she looked at him for a long moment. "She does not need you to be sorry," she said. "She needs you to be present." "Yes," he said. "For years," she said. "Not just when it is easy." "Yes," he said again. She studied him. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone more certain of themselves," she said. "Someone who had more answers prepared." She tilted her head. "You're sitting there looking like a man who is aware of how much he does not know." "I'm aware of how much I do not know," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "Good. That is the right starting point." She stood up, pressed his shoulder briefly with one firm hand, not gently, but with the specific pressure of someone making a point, and went to find Zuri. He sat at the table and felt the pressure of her hand on his shoulder and looked at the room. His people and her people existing in the same space, talking, eating, the complicated and particular warmth of a gathering that had not been constructed for appearance but assembled from actual affection, and felt something he identified, after a moment, as gratitude. Not for the room. For the path it had taken to get to the room. He would not have understood the room if he had arrived at it differently. If it had come easily, before the bet, before the storm, before the pepper soup, and the cockroach, and the amusement park, and 11 minutes in the rain, and a rooftop, and the specific education of watching the person you love walk toward a life that did not include you in feeling, with complete physical clarity, what that meant. He would not have understood it. He needed to have been brought the long way around. Some things required the distance. Later, much later, after the guests had gone and the hotel floor had settled into Kinuit's after-event quiet, they stood at the window of the room. The same window. The storm night window. The city below it exactly as it had been that first night, except that the city had not changed at all, and the two people looking at it were entirely different in their relationship to each other and to themselves. Zuri's head was against his shoulder, the way it had been in the storm, except she was not asleep and he was not watching from outside the feeling. They were both inside it, both present. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "The night in the lounge," she paused. "If I had not made the bet, if I had just let it go, let what you said sit there, said good night, gone home, would you have ever seen it yourself?" He was quiet. He held the question with the seriousness it deserved, because it was a real question, and she had the right to a real answer, and a real answer required honesty rather than reassurance. "I do not know," he said. She did not respond. "I want to say yes," he said. "I want to say that it was already working its way toward the surface, and I would have arrived at it eventually." He exhaled. "But I spent 10 years not arriving at it, and I had very efficient systems for not arriving at things I had decided not to examine." He paused. "The bet forced a different kind of attention. I do not know what would have happened without it." She was quiet for a moment. "That is the honest answer," she said. "Yes. I appreciate it more than the reassuring one." "I know," he said. "You always have." She turned her face slightly against his shoulder. "I am glad I made it." "So am I," he said, "considerably." She laughed. The real one. The slightly too loud one that arrived before she could decide whether to contain it. And he felt the vibration of it against his side, and felt the city below him and the room behind him and the woman beside him who had known him longer than almost anyone and chosen him with full information, which was the rarest and most significant thing one person could do for another. He had spent 34 years building walls. He had spent the last months learning what existed in the space where walls had been. What existed there was not emptiness. It was room. Room for something that had been trying to arrive for 10 years, that had been patient enough to wait, that had been remarkable enough to manufacture its own door when the wall refused to move. The city moved below them. Sole, indifferent and continuous, and lit against its own darkness, doing what cities do, holding everyone inside it, asking nothing, offering the particular comfort of being witnessed by something vast enough that the smallness of individual lives became, paradoxically, significant. He held her. She held back. The window held the city, and the city held the night, and the night held everything. Every year of wrong categories and careful silences, and the long education of learning to see what had always been standing in front of him. He was still learning. That was fine. He had, finally, someone to learn beside. And he was not going to waste a single day of it looking away.